Well, I don't know why it would drag the divine down into the realm of the mundane if we're speaking of something like the straight and narrow path of harmony between multiple modes of being. I don't think it doesn't make any difference to me whether it's the material reaching upward or the divine descending downward. I don't think there's any difference between those two things.
You don't. That's exactly right. That's the problem.
Well, I don't.
You don't see the difference.
Well, look at it this way. So, for example, in this conversation, you know this to be the case. Like, there's various ways that this conversation could go sideways, right? Seriously, like either of us could try to win. Either of us could try to demonstrate our intellectual superiority, right? Each of us could misrepresent the other. Or we could both try, and I do think we are in fact trying that, and I think Alex is helping along with that just fine. We could try to follow the thread of the exploratory truth and see if we could get somewhere. Now, I don't think there is any difference between that, by the way, and what's expressed in the biblical texts as the spirit of the Logos. That's why we have dialogue.
I'm very interested in the possibility that truths emerge through evolving manuscripts. Now, that's a very interesting idea, and it's totally different from divine inspiration. And I want to pursue it because I don't believe in divine inspiration, but I would be prepared to believe in evolving manuscripts.
Well, I would say this is why I had set forward the possibility of taking a look particularly at Mircea Eliade, because that's where you'd find the best work. He's brilliant. I believe that if you studied the history of religious ideas, it's a 3-volume manuscript, or the sacred and the profane, which is probably his single best work, that you'd see profound analogies between the manner in which you've been construing the world biologically, including the trains of thought that led you to the development of the idea of the meme. I really believe that.
Well, analogies is one thing, but is it the same thing?
I think it's the same. I do. I think, look, I don't know. That's why I'd like your opinion on it. Well, seriously, like, it's a complicated question. It's a complicated question. Most people don't know both literatures. There's not a lot of people to discuss this sort of thing with. Camille Paglia, I talked to Camille Paglia about this. She studied the work of a man named Erich Neumann. Neumann wrote a book called The Origins and History of Consciousness, which is a work of genius, and also another book called The Great Mother, which is a study of the symbolism of the feminine. It's a great book. Paglia told me that she believed that if the Academy would have turned to Erich Neumann, who's a student of Jung, although the greatest student of Jung, and maybe one who surpassed him, that the entire culture war that's torn the universities apart wouldn't have happened. People don't know this literature. And let me give you an example of this. You tell me what you think about this. Okay, so I spent a fair bit of time studying the psychophysiology of the hypothalamus. Okay, so the hypothalamus is set up, it's got 2 halves, basically. One half deals with fundamental motivated states, hunger, thirst, defensive aggression, sexuality, and so forth. And when those areas are dominated, the biologically relevant goal is activated and perceptions are oriented towards that goal. Okay, so now then you might ask yourself, well, what happens if all those biologically motivated states are satiated? And the answer seems to be is that the other half of the hypothalamus kicks in and it mediates exploratory behavior. And so the default structure of the mammalian nervous system is, if satiated or in doubt, explore and gather new information. There's no difference between that and hero mythology. They are the same thing. They're the same thing. The dragon fight, for example, which is the oldest story we have. It's coded in the Mesopotamian mythology. The dragon fight story is explore the dangerous unknown, discover the treasure that revitalizes the community. There's no difference between that and the science that you practice. They're the same thing.
What do you think of that,
Richard?
Richard?
Same story.
I don't know what to make of that. I mean, you say they're the same story. You've analogized the dragon fight to
Well, how many
fighting
dragons have
Satan.
you overcome in your life?
I'm not interested in dragons. I'm interested in reality.
Okay, so okay. So I read a book a while back that described the biological reality of the dragon. Say, well, there's no such thing as a dragon. It's like, okay, is there such a thing as a predator?
Of course.
Well, that's a meta category. What's the category of predator? Bear, eagle, if you're a primate. Fire? Is fire a predator?
No.
Well, it's complicated because a fire kills you. Okay, so is there a worse predator than serpentine, flying, fire-breathing reptile? Is that not the imagistic equivalent of predator? So in what way, if predator is real, in what way isn't dragon real? It doesn't take that much imagination to see the identity. And then wouldn't the fundamental task of edible primates be to figure out how to overcome the dragon forever?
I don't know why you say dragon. I mean, we have lions, we have tigers, we have saber-tooths, we have
why not
tyrannosaurs out there.
Right, but why not abstract? Because it's for the same reason that we have the term predator. Like we have the term bear, lion, Komodo dragon. Well, you make an amalgamation, you say, well, the relevant set of features is an image. Well, what's the image? Predator as such. What's the image of that? The dragon that never disappears. And then there's a twist on that, which is so cool. It's so interesting because you can imagine rabbit mythology, which would be something like predator appears, freeze. But that's not the human story. The human story is predator appears, there's a treasure somewhere. Right? That's a completely different pathway of evolutionary significance. Like the way that we construe the world isn't freeze like predator. It's like, oh, there's a predator. Maybe there's something valuable lurking in our conflict with it. You know, our sticks and our spears that enable our fragile bodies to stand up against the dragons of the world.
So a dragon is a pictorial representation of the abstracted concept of a predator.
Yes.
As you say, we already have the term predator. And so it might be useful in art, in narrative, you can't paint an abstraction.
We had the image way before we had the word.
Sure, okay.
But that's a seriously important thing to understand.
But now we have the word. We have the word predator. And maybe if we were doing art, maybe if we were all going to sort of draw a picture or tell a story, and we wanted to invent a story to give our children a good moral message, we might invent this dragon or use this dragon as...
Well, we do, always. We do it continually.
Exactly, we do.
We do it with Harry Potter. We do it with the Lord of the Rings. We do it with the Avengers.
But when you say...
There's no escaping from it.
But when you say the biology of a dragon, you must understand how that can be misleading as to the enterprise that you're engaging in, because we're talking here about narrative, we're talking here about art, we're talking here about representations in literature.
I don't think the category of dragon is any less valid than the category of lion.
Any less biological?
Well, it depends on your level of analysis. We have the term predator, which implies that all predators have something in common, because otherwise we wouldn't have the term. It's like there's no reason to assume ontological priority for the category of lion over the category of predator. Mm-hmm. Like it depends on all that would determine which of those terms should be used is the purpose towards which the conceptualization is being directed. Like if you want to identify a particular class of predator, well, then lion is a good term.
You would say that lions are an instantiation of this bracket term of predator.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would also say...
Would you therefore say that a lion is an instantiation of the bracket term of dragon?
Yes. Yes, because, because we're not only fact-oriented creatures, right? It actually matters to us whether we get eaten. Like it's one thing to lay out the nomenclature of the animal kingdom, but it's another thing to remember that predators can eat you. And then it's another thing, and this is very interesting, and it's relevant to that story of the bronze serpent. It's like, what do we want to teach our children? Well, to identify predators, obviously. Well, what do we want to teach them more profoundly? What attitude they should take towards the eternal fact of the predator. And the attitude they should take is something like the courage to voluntarily confront, and not to run away, and not to hide, and not to freeze, and not to casually demonize, but to assume that in the combat with the eternal predator, an eternal treasure might be found. And that's exactly what you do, whether you know it or not, when you teach a child to be courageous. And we know from the psychological literature that generalizes. And I do think it's identical with the mechanism of learning in human beings, because kids, us, we always learn on the edge. You know, in your own life, and I don't want to be presumptuous, but no doubt there have been situations where you've been battling to have your ideas distributed, even to modify your own conceptions when you had something new to learn. That's a sacrifice. You have to kill your stupidity so that you can move forward. That's what happens in the story of Abraham, by the way, when he makes sequential sacrifices. So in the story of Abraham, you tell me what you think about this, because it staggered me when I understood it. Abraham is a protected person. He doesn't have to lift a finger. He lives in the socialist utopia. He's got everything delivered hand to mouth. He's at home till he's 70. And God comes to him as the voice of adventure, which is something remarkable to see, and says, you leave your zone of comfort and go out into the world, have your terrible adventure. And Abraham says yes. And then a series of cataclysms occurs around him, just like it does in every adventurous life. And every time an episode concludes, he makes a sacrifice. Why? To get rid of what's stupid and old about him, so that he can progress and transform. And that happens to such a degree that he gets a new name, which means he's changed so dramatically he's not even the person he used to be. And that's a consequence of following that adventurous pathway.